There aren't a lot of people who like Antoinette Brown, the slinky, sultry jazz singer who seems to steal Lestat's heart. She appears early in the third episode of Interview with the Vampire, questioning Louis and Lestat's relationship before she herself dances between the sheets with a man who is practically married. We've seen these kind of situations play out before on television. There is Cassie, who sleeps with her best friend's boyfriend in Euphoria. There is Dan from The Fatal Attraction, who has an affair with a woman while his wife and child are away. And Lestat, well, he likes to get it on with Antoinette out of sheer boredom, it seems like. Whatever the case, things don't ever end well for the other woman, that is. They almost always end up hurt or shunned, or in the worst situations, dead. Being a mistress is almost always a cautionary tale. Yet so many men and women end up in these terrible one-sided relationships. Why? Well, because many of these sad and unfortunate people are victims of narcissistic abuse. And in short, they're groomed to be primary and secondary supply. I'm going to explain how and why in this video, so please stay tuned. I remember reading about Marilyn Monroe and about how she grew up in foster care. She was always very attractive, but things changed for her when she went through puberty. She became beautiful and blonde and voluptuous. Her clothing, no matter how square or plain, hugged her curves and hips. And seemingly overnight, she went from being practically invisible to being desired by all. We see this same thing kind of playing out with Cassie on HBO's hit series Euphoria. She is basically neglected by her father, who is a drug user and a drug abuser. Yet she seems to find this new life when she starts to blossom. She is noticed more, and for the first time, Cassie is desirable. Cassie, much like Marilyn Monroe, kind of got used to being the other woman. After all, Marilyn Monroe was linked to the President of the United States at one point in time, and Cassie, well, she did get herself mixed up with a psychopath who couldn't love anyone, not even himself. Now, there are many women who have played mistresses on television, but they seem to be playing this role for their mere survival. It was Chio from Memoirs of a Geisha who needed the chairman to shield her from the harsh realities of World War II in Japan. Cleopatra needed to seduce Caesar to save her family, her queendom, and of course herself. Diane from the Serpent Queen, well, she groomed young Henry when he was just a boy to love only her. Sadly, most people who become a narcissistic supply are groomed in some way, shape, or form. Many are like Marilyn Monroe, growing up in environments that lack family support and unconditional love. Many of these children grow up in an environment where food is not only scarce, but love and affection is too. Parents or guardians have too many mouths to feed and children to hug and kiss. As a result of this, the children start to compete for their parents' or loved ones' affections. In most cases, they are rewarded with basic resources like food and water, or praises, or approval, or validation. Soon, the children will do anything to win their guardian's approval. Sadly, these kind of behaviors condition the child to believe that other people's needs are more important than their own. As a result, they begin to forego their own needs, neglect themselves in order to please others, and they begin to find themselves in a pattern of one-sided and abusive relationships. They go through life believing that they have to give up so much of themselves to be loved, or that they have to win people over with gifts, affection, sex, and even money. They enter into these relationships thinking that one day there's going to be a great payoff. They believe that if they do everything right, that one day that person that they're vying for will finally give them the love that they desire. Only that day never comes. Why? Well, because these people are magnets to narcissists. After all, the narcissist doesn't need to spend so much time breaking them down. They are already broken. Many of them are repeating much of the same patterns that they were born in, patterns from their childhood. They start to compete for their man. They fight for their woman. They make fools of themselves in the name of love. Naturally, they understand that the odds are heavily stacked against them. After all, most men don't leave their wives for the other woman. Yet the pattern of trying to win over someone's affection becomes an endless competition to a point where it's almost an obsession. And each time their lover comes to them and not their wife is a win in their eyes. After all, there are winners in this game. Cleopatra did win over Caesar. Chio did manage to win over the chairman and Memoirs of a Geisha. And Diane managed to be Henry's lover late into her older years. But these women were different. They weren't broken. They didn't sacrifice their own needs to please others. In fact, they did the opposite. They always put themselves first, and they used their sexuality to cow and manipulate powerful men to increase their stations in life. As for Antoinette, well, I really don't know her backstory. However, I can guess that she believed that she was going to be one of the winners. She believed that she was going to wrap Lestat around her finger, in much the same way that Cleopatra ensnarled Caesar and later Mark Antony into her love nest. Only Lestat's heart belonged to Louis. Lestat spent the first episode wooing Louis into his arms. Antoinette, on the other hand, he had her in bed in a matter of minutes. Antoinette was the woman he ran to when he was rejected by Louis, and he only turned her into a vampire to spy on Louis and Claudia's telepathic conversations. And I think many can agree that Lestat kept Antoinette around just to make Louis jealous. One could also argue that Louis was Lestat's primary supply and Antoinette, well, she was a second. I would argue, however, that Antoinette was way in over her head from the very beginning. She didn't have the power to win over Lestat. It was a competition that she was destined to lose. She was too hurt, she was too broken to be his soulmate. And like most cautionary tales about the other women on television, she ended up losing not only her man, but also her life. Now, this was another video essay by the Modern Mystic. Peace out.